Okay, today we're going to be working on an introduction to biology. So this is the first video we're going to do specifically around biology, along with the characteristics of life. So the characteristics that all living things have. So starting with, what is biology? Biology, bio means life. Ology means study of. So that means biology means the study of life. And scientists use biological principles to help solve real-world problems. And we can use this in biology by doing things like preserving the environment, because the environment is made up of all living things. We also do many things in medicine using the human genome. So we use biological principles to solve real world problems. And these can involve living things, such as preserving the environment, because the environment is made up of and contains many living things. Our food itself is actually, or once was, living. So trees are living, fruits and vegetables are also living. So again, it can help be used to improve the food supply. So we have the food that we need, and the characteristics of our food are such that it's enough for us to be nourished. So if you were to look up an image of a real banana, a real natural banana versus a genetically modified banana, you'd be surprised to see that a real banana is really small and has tons of large seeds, versus the bananas that we buy in the supermarket today. They're much larger, and we modified them. Humans modified them, selectively bred them, and then modified them genetically to make them such that they're larger and better for us to consume. So we have a higher quality food supply. We can also do things like understand the human genome, so looking at the genes and genetic material within individuals to help understand diseases, to help understand things that we can do to improve humans, to make us happy and healthier. And along with understanding the human genome, it then can help us fight different diseases. And this could be things like the coronavirus that we just went through, or other things like HIV, cancer, cystic fibrosis. Most diseases or disorders of the body, scientists are working on trying to figure out a way, or have already figured out some ways, to fight them using what we know about our genes and theirs. So those are just some of the many ways that we can, and scientists, use biology. But now talking about characteristics of living things themselves. So it takes 5 properties to be considered living. All living things have all 5 properties. If something doesn't have one of these properties, then it is not alive. And we're going to go into them in detail, but right now we're just going to talk about them general. So the first one is cellular organization, meaning it has to be made of cells. If it's not made of cells, it's not alive. The second property is called homeostasis, which is the ability to maintain a stable state on the inside. 3 is metabolism, which is going to be the regulation of energy and chemical reactions. 4, reproduction, they need to be able to reproduce. And 5, heredity, meaning you can pass on your traits. So now we're going to go into each one of those into a bit more detail. So the first one that we mentioned was cellular organization. So cellular organization essentially means you're made of cells. Cellular organization, you're organized by cells. And the basic unit of life is the cell. So all living things are made of cells. That is one property of what we'll later discover as the cell theory. All living things are made of cells. I'm made of a cell. A bacteria is made of a cell. The only difference between a bacteria and me, well, one of the differences is I have millions of cells. A bacteria is just one. Trees are made of cells. Grass is made of cells. My dog laying on the floor, he's made of cells too. All living things are made of cells. And these cells are organized in different levels of organization. So within a cell, I have molecules, and these are going to be things like oxygen or CO2, different molecules. Molecules are then going to make up organelles. And this is going to be something like the mitochondria, or the nucleus, or the ER. Those are all organelles found in a cell. Many organelles, a system of organelles, then creates the cell. The cell, again, is the basic unit of life. A group of cells working together for a common purpose is going to make up a tissue. Tissues then make up organs. Organs make organ systems, and many organ systems make an organism. So it's a flowing process. And some organisms are simpler than others. So, for example, I'm more complex than a bacteria. Bacteria is one cell. It's a different type of cell than humans are made of, but it's still a cell. Okay, so cellular organization, number 1 of what it takes to be alive. Number 2 of what it takes to be alive is called homeostasis. Homeostasis is the ability to maintain a stable internal environment. And one thing I like to point out in homeostasis, it has the letters STA for stay. Stay the same. You have the ability to stay the same. And we want to have our internal environment relatively stable. If our bodies deviate from what is normal for too long a period of time, we could potentially die. Things that our bodies need to have stable in order to live would be things like temperature. If our bodies get too hot or too cold for too long, we could potentially die. In humans, we have to keep our heart rate relatively constant. Heart rate goes up, down for too long, we could potentially die. It puts us at risk. We're going to need a relatively stable blood pressure to keep nutrients circulating in our body. If it gets too high or too low, we could die. So for instance, in our PowerPoint here, this guy here, this little rabbit, lives in the desert. Desert is very, very hot. And one way that he keeps his temperature stable so that it doesn't get too high and essentially cook him is by having very, very large ears. He has really large ears. They have a high surface area, meaning they can release heat. So he helps release heat through these really massive ears. I'm sure they also help to hear predators, but for homeostasis, it helps him maintain a cooler temperature. Versus this guy here who lives in the Arctic where it's really, really cold, he has lots of blubber on his body, and fat probably too as well, to help him stay warm so his temperature doesn't get too low and freeze. So again, the ability to maintain a stable internal environment is going to be known as homeostasis. So our key words for homeostasis are going to be stable, internal condition, maintain. Those all are indicators that we're looking for the property called homeostasis, the ability to maintain a relatively stable internal environment. And that's going to bring us next to the property 3, which is called metabolism. And we all know that living things need energy to do the work in our bodies. And what metabolism does is regulate that energy. So it helps facilitate chemical and physical changes that are going to help regulate energy to either store it or use it. So living things use our energy to grow and move, and metabolism helps us regulate that energy. So an example of metabolism would be using chemical reactions to harness energy. I think that's not supposed to be there. And I can tell you from experience that typically students get metabolism and homeostasis confused and mixed up. Those are the most too often ones that are flipped around. So again, we're going to review them one more time. So I'm going to scroll back up a little bit. Homeostasis is the ability to stay the same or have a stable environment. And usually this is done by regulating things on the inside, regulating temperature, regulating heart rate, regulating anything inside so that we are stable for stasis. Metabolism is how we use and process energy. One way you can remember that is when people say you have a high metabolism, it's because you're able to burn off your energy really quickly. You're able to regulate how your energy is used and stored. So, metabolism, harnessing and processing of energy. That brings us down to the fourth item that it takes to be considered alive, and that is reproduction. All living things are going to be able to reproduce, and we have to be able to reproduce in order for our species to continue to exist. Typically, in order for reproduction to qualify here, it has to be the type of reproduction such that an organism can do it all on its own or with a partner. So, for instance, a virus, the way that it reproduces is not on its own, and it doesn't reproduce with another virus. The way that it works is by using a host or infecting something else. So when we get a virus, it goes in our bodies and we help it reproduce. That would not be considered reproduction because it is not sexual or asexual, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. Meaning the virus cannot reproduce all on its own, and it can't do it with another virus partner. So reproduction is the process by which organisms make more of their own kind. And it has to be done either all alone by itself, asexually, or with another like partner, which is sexual, meaning to humans, to cats, to whatevers, it would be sexual. But it cannot be a virus using a human. The human is the host, and it helps the virus reproduce. So that is not considered typical reproduction for this case because it is not done by itself or with another virus partner. Okay, number 5, the last one of the 5 it takes to be alive, is heredity, meaning all organisms have to be able to pass on their traits to their offspring. So heredity is the ability to pass down traits from parent to offspring, and this happens by passing down genes, because genes are the basic unit of heredity, and it's found in our DNA. So we give our genes to our kids. So heredity is the process of passing on our genes. However, sometimes we don't give an identical copy of our genes because a random mutation happens. A mutation is going to be a random change, a random permanent change in the DNA of a gene. This can be random, it can be caused by external forces, but mutation is a random permanent change in the DNA of a gene, and it can happen at any point. But sometimes that's why we don't inherit identical copies of genes. So that's the 5 that it takes to be alive. But next we're going to move into some characteristics that help organisms survive long term. So in order to be considered alive, you have to have the 5 that we talked about. However, these last 2 are going to be very beneficial to help an organism survive long term. So those two are going to be called response to environment and evolutionary adaptation. So response to environment means an organism needs to be able to sense the environment around them and then change in response. So the question here is, what process affords organisms the ability to respond? So what that's going to mean is, how are we responding? So what we're going to do, the way that this works, is organisms are going to be able to sense changes in the world around them. So I'm going to say in environment. So you sense changes in your environment, and then you are going to respond accordingly. And this process helps to maintain homeostasis. So for instance, I'm a human, I walk outside, really, really cold, my body senses it, and what does my body automatically do? It's going to start to shiver. If it's really, really cold, my body's going to start to shiver to help me warm up. And that is maintaining homeostasis. And then the second thing that'll help organisms survive long term is called evolutionary adaptation. So over time, organisms have the ability to change, and change over long periods of time is called evolution. And what evolution is going to lead to are more favorable traits in a population, because an organism that has the good traits to survive are going to be able to pass them down. And if they pass them down, then their organisms are going to have them based on heredity that we talked about a few minutes ago. So what's going to happen over time is that organisms are going to have adaptations, and adaptations are traits that help with survival. And if the organism is able to survive, it's going to pass down the trait. So essentially what's happening is nature is choosing the best traits, and that process is called natural selection. So here, if you are a fish, and you're a fast fish, and you're able to swim away from predators so that you can survive, the trait of being fast is going to be passed to your offspring. And over time, nature chooses to have more fish that are fast so they can evade predators. So over time, fish are going to have the adaptation or the trait that helps them survive, which in this case would be the ability to swim fast. So it's going to help them survive long term. All right, so this was characteristics of life. We're going to have some practice on this on Canvas. So your next activity will be practicing characteristics of life on Canvas.